Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday and Sunday. These are some of the first words anybody learns when they start with English. But have you ever wondered, French, German, Spanish, Italian, English, we all have 7 days. Why? And where do those names come from? I mean, Monday is the day of the moon, okay, but why the moon? And Tuesday, Tues? What's that? And why do you always mix it up with Thurs? Well, those are the questions that I want to answer today. Except for that last one. That one's on you. So, let's dive into it. To answer the first question, we're going to have to go back to the ancient Babylonians, who lived along the river Euphrates and Tigris in modern-day Iraq. These guys were serious astronomers and used the planets and stars to keep time remarkably well. So well, in fact, that their system is still in use today in the form of the 24-hour clock. Well, 12 hours, as it didn't work at night. We also still use a version of their lunar calendar, which consisted of 29 or 30 days, depending on the month, which they subdivided into 4 7-day weeks. But why the number 7? Considering the lunar cycle is 29.5 days, does it not make more sense to round up by 0.5 like the Chinese did and have 3 weeks of 10 days, than to round down by 1.5? Well, the answer to this can be found in the sky and the 7 celestial bodies that move through it: the Sun, the Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus and Saturn, otherwise known as the classical planets. But why are the Sun and the Moon part of this list of planets? Well, that answer can be found in the origin of the word planet, which comes from the ancient Greek planetes asteres, which means wandering stars, in contrast to the visually fixed stars. This belief was shared by the Babylonians, who believed that each of these wandering stars personified one of their gods: Shamash, Sin, Nergal, Nabu, Marduk, Ishtar and Nurta. These gods then had one of the 7 days named in their honor. However, the way the order was decided wasn't exactly straightforward. First, they believed that the faster a planet crossed the sky, the closer it must be to Earth. This was a belief that continued into Roman times, with Saturn being known as the most remote planet. This order was then applied to the 24-hour day, where each hour was dedicated to one of the gods in turn, starting at the top with Saturn or Ninurta, and proceeding downwards to Jupiter or Marduk, and so on. And finally, the god that occupied the first hour of each day had it named in their honor. Here we can see the order of our modern week taking shape, with the anomaly that the week begins with Saturday. But this still doesn't answer how this system is still with us 3,000 years later. Well, the answer to that is threefold. First, there were the Jews, who were held in captivity by the Babylons for 70 years, during which time they adopted the Babylonian system, which later set the foundation for the 7-day creation story. Second, there were the Greeks, who, under Alexander the Great, conquered the region and consequently adopted many of its customs, including the 7-day week. And finally, it was the Romans who conquered both the Greeks and then Jews, adopting the 7-day week from the former and almost an entire religion from the latter. In each case of adoption, the Greeks and then Romans interpreted and adapted the weekdays to their own deities, believing the deities of the other to simply be the same manifestation of their own god, just under a different name. This process even had a name: Interpretatio Graeca and Interpretatio Romana, respectively. Under these interpretations, Ninurta, the god of agriculture, was identified with Kronos and then Saturn. Shamash, the sun god, was the obvious candidate for Helios and then Sol. Likewise, Sin, the moon god, was interpreted as Selene and then Luna. Nergal, the god of war, was identified as the Greek and Roman gods of war, Ares and then Mars. Nabu, whose name meant prophet, was identified as the messenger gods, Hermes and then Mercury. His father Marduk, the most important of the Babylonian gods, who used lightning bolts to strike down his enemies, was identified as Zeus and then Jupiter. And finally Ishtar, the god of sex, was identified with the Greek and Roman goddesses of love, Aphrodite and Venus. Later, when the Roman Empire adopted Christianity, Saturn, was replaced by Sabbatum from the Hebrew Shabbat, literally meaning to rest, while Jesus, Domino Nostro, took the position of Sol. During this time, there was much pressure to change the other names of the week, but of all the Romance languages, it was only Portuguese that managed to purge itself of these pagan names. Wonderful. Now, all that's left are the English names. Well, at around the same time the Romans adopted their 7-day week, they came into contact with the Germanic tribes on the other side of the River Rhine. The Romans both waged war and traded with them, as well as observing their customs, like any good colonizing neighbors do. Authors, such as Tacitus, wrote extensively about their customs in his work Germania, and in it he refers to the Germanic gods directly with their Roman names. There's that Interpretatio Romana again. The Germanic tribes later adopt this interpretation, giving us what would eventually become the English days of the week. The day of Sol became the goddess Sunna's day, the day of Luna became the day of the god Mona, Mars was identified as Tiw, or, as he is known in Norse mythology, Tyr. It's worth noting at this point that all of the Germanic gods are better known by their Norse names, thanks to Marvel and the fact that the Vikings put their pagan selves in everyone's business for more than 2 centuries. Tyr was the main Germanic god of war. It's no surprise that they had many, and he is often depicted with his right hand missing, which he lost to the ferocious wolf Fenrir, who was the son of Loki and also lent his name to the Harry Potter character Fenrir Greyback. Mercury was identified as Woden, or the Viking Odin, the chief god of Midgard. Why the Roman god of merchants, yes, merchant and market are related to Mercury, was identified with the father figure in Germanic mythology is a little strange, but there are 2 possible explanations. One is that Mercury was the most important Roman god in the province of Gaul at the time when Tacitus, who was also from there, was writing his work. The second was their propensity to wander amongst us mortals, in disguise, testing and sometimes tricking us. And it was this aspect of a wanderer with a staff that later inspired the character Gandalf from Lord of the Rings. Next is Thunor, or, as we all know him, Thor, who was identified as Jupiter, undoubtedly for his use of lightning bolts and thunder. And yes, thunder is from the same name as Thunor, or vice versa. After that is Thor's mother, Freya, or Frigga, the goddess of love, beauty and fertility, and she was identified as Venus. Curiously, the name Freya simply meant lady, and is related to the modern German Frau, meaning the same thing. This suggests that at some point to say her real name became a taboo, although nobody is entirely sure why. And finally, there's Saturn, for whom no equivalent was given. Finding an answer for this has been particularly difficult, with many sources suggesting that there simply wasn't a Nordic god that closely enough resembled the Roman god of agriculture. While this explains the Norse word for Saturday, Laugardagur, meaning bath day, it does not explain why the southern Germanic tribes adopted Saturn as someone to honor in their week's pantheon, as they already had a god of agriculture. Personally, I suspect that it might have something to do with the perceived strength of Saturn as the god of agriculture. The Romans obviously possessed far greater technology and knowledge of agriculture than the Germanic tribes, whose main sustenance was from herding, fishing and hunting. And back in those days, this was probably interpreted as a blessing from the gods, rather than the Romans simply just having a better climate. But who knows?